In the heart of southeastern Nigeria, where the river Amambala bends like a sleeping serpent, there stood a village hidden among tall palm trees and endless fields of cassava. It was a land of laughter and sorrow, a land where the drums of tradition beat louder than the whispers of science, and where every sickness was seen as either the punishment of the gods or the curse of an enemy. The people of this village lived close to the soil. Their huts, built from red mud, stood firm under the sun and crumbled slowly under the rain. Every evening, the smoke of firewood rose into the sky, carrying with it the aroma of yam porridge and bitter leaf soup. Children played in the dusty compounds, their laughter mingling with the songs of crickets, while elders sat under the shade of the iroko tree, telling stories of the ancestors. But hidden in the beauty of this village was a silent enemy. It did not roar like a lion or strike like lightning. It moved quietly, like a thief in the night. It came on fragile wings, no bigger than a fingernail, humming softly as though singing a lullaby. And yet it carried death. This enemy was the mosquito, bearer of malaria, the disease that had stolen more lives in Africa than wars, famine, or drought. This is the story of the Okafor family and how their tears became a lesson for the whole village. The Okafor family was known for their hard work and pride. Chikwudi, the father, was a strong farmer whose hands were thick with calluses from years of tilling the soil. His wife, Janet, was young and beautiful, her face round and gentle, her eyes always glowing with kindness. Yet, beneath her smile lived sorrow too heavy for words. Janet had borne 4 children. 3 were now buried in shallow graves behind the family's hut. Each child had followed the same path: fever that burned like fire, shivering that shook their small bodies, vomiting that emptied their stomachs, then sudden stillness. In the eyes of the villagers, this was no ordinary sickness. To them, these deaths were not caused by insects or parasites. They were curses, punishments from the gods, or perhaps the work of jealous witches. "No woman loses children like this," the elders whispered. "Her hands are not clean." At night, Janet would sit by the fire with her last surviving twin girls, Ngozi and Amara. Their bellies empty, their faces tired, but their eyes still wide with innocence. She would hold them close, terrified that the same fate would snatch them away. Each time a mosquito whined in the darkness, she would slap her arms, her legs, her neck, but she could not chase away the fear. Janet noticed something the elders refused to see. Her children always fell sick after the rains, when pools of water gathered near the huts and mosquitoes danced in the air like shadows. She remembered the swollen bellies, the pale lips, the sweat that drenched their little bodies. She knew in her heart that this sickness came not from the gods, but from those tiny, blood-sucking insects that haunted their nights. But in the village, women did not challenge the wisdom of elders. If the elders said it was witchcraft, then witchcraft it must be. Janet's voice was drowned in the river of superstition. The mother-in-law, Mama Ifioma, hated Janet. She blamed her for the deaths. She spat words like poison. "You are cursed. You bring death to my son's household. How can a woman bury her children one after another? You are a witch." The insults broke Janet's spirit, but she held on to her daughters with the grip of a drowning woman clutching driftwood. She vowed silently, "I will not lose these 2. I will fight for them, even if no one believes me." As the days turned into weeks, the village continued to whisper, and Janet continued to pray. She did not yet know that the very enemy killing her children was invisible to the naked eye, a parasite carried in the saliva of mosquitoes, injected into the blood of the innocent each time the insect fed. The villagers called it a curse. Science called it malaria. And for Janet, it was a shadow that followed her every step. The rains came early that year. The clouds gathered thick and heavy over the land, their bellies swollen with water. Thunder rolled across the skies like the beating of ancestral drums, and lightning cut through the heavens like the blade of a warrior's sword. When the downpour finally arrived, it was as if the earth itself was drowning. The red soil of the village turned into mud, streams overflowed, and puddles formed in every open space. Children splashed barefoot in the rain, laughing with joy, while women stretched out their arms to collect water in clay pots. To the villagers, rain meant fertility. Yam fields would thrive, cassava roots would grow fat, and streams would provide fish. But with the rain also came the silent killers. In the shallow pools and puddles, mosquitoes laid their eggs. Invisible larvae wriggled in the stagnant water, soon to grow wings and take flight. The air, once filled with the songs of birds, now carried the high-pitched hum of mosquitoes, a sound that would become the lullaby of death. Janet sat at the doorway of her hut, watching the sky darken with clouds. Her daughters, Ngozi and Amara, sat beside her, their little hands clutching her wrapper. She brushed their hair softly, yet her eyes were fixed on the mosquitoes that danced above the puddles near the compound. The elders said those insects were harmless, but Janet knew better. Each time the mosquitoes multiplied, sickness followed. Each time the buzzing filled the air, a child somewhere in the village felt a fever. That night, the Okafor compound was filled with unease. The rain drummed on the thatched roof, and inside, Janet prayed silently as her daughter slept. She slapped her arms again and again, chasing away the relentless hum that crept into the hut. But the mosquitoes were too many. Their bites were sharp and constant. By dawn, Ngozi's forehead was burning hot. Her small body shivered under the raffia mat, her lips pale, her breath shallow. The sickness had returned. Janet lifted her child into her arms, her heart pounding with terror. She had seen this before, the sweating, the weakness, the glassy eyes. Malaria had found its next victim. She cried out to her husband, Chikwudi, but the man, like the rest of the villagers, still clung to tradition. He shook his head and said, "It is the work of witches. We must call the dibia, the native doctor." And so once again, the family turned to charms, herbs, and sacrifices. Goats were slaughtered, palm oil poured on the ground, incantations whispered into the night. The dibia burned leaves and waved feathers, chanting to the unseen spirits. But as the fire died out, Ngozi's fever did not. By the third day, Janet's daughter was too weak to sit up. Her eyes rolled back, her skin was damp with sweat, and her breath rattled like a calabash with pebbles. Janet screamed into the night, holding her child against her chest. Yet the village was silent. They had seen it before. They would see it again. Children taken too soon. Janet wept until her tears could no longer flow. And in that moment she knew, if she did not find a way to protect her remaining daughter, Amara, malaria would finish what it had started. The rain continued to fall. The puddles grew deeper. And in the stillness of the night, the mosquitoes hummed, carrying with them the curse of death. The rains did not stop. They poured from the heavens in long, endless sheets, flooding farms and turning paths into rivers of mud. Each night, the frogs croaked loudly in the swamps, but their song was drowned by another, the high-pitched drone of countless mosquitoes. They were everywhere. They rose from the puddles, hid in the grasses, and slipped silently into huts through cracks in the mud walls. They perched on sleeping children's skin, feeding unseen. And with every bite, they carried a silent gift, the parasite that lived in blood, waiting to burn its way into the marrow of the body. The first to fall was Ngozi, the daughter of Janet and Chikwudi. But she was not the last. In the weeks that followed, the entire village began to feel the weight of malaria. Children, once full of laughter, now lay weak under raffia mats, their eyes heavy, their lips trembling with fever. Mothers carried basins of herbs and poured them down their throats, whispering desperate prayers to the spirits. Fathers sat helplessly, watching their sons waste away like candle flames dying in the wind. At night, the village was no longer filled with the sound of drums and stories. Instead, it was filled with the sound of coughing, of wailing, of mothers crying into the darkness. The dibia, the village native doctor, became the busiest man in Amuaka. He burned herbs, tied amulets, and made sacrifices of fowls and goats. He promised cures, but none lasted. The fever always returned, hotter, deadlier. And in the silence of those nights, the people did not know that what ravaged them was not a spirit, not a curse, not the anger of ancestors. It was a small parasite carried by the mosquitoes that buzzed above their huts. It was malaria, a sickness so ancient, so cruel, it had haunted humanity for centuries. Janet sat in front of her hut, watching Amara, her last surviving daughter, sleep. The child's chest rose and fell quickly, her skin clammy with sweat. Janet fanned her with a palm frond, whispering lullabies, her heart heavy with fear. "Not again," she whispered. "Not this one. Not my last child." She looked out across the compound. Other women sat weeping beside their huts, their children lying limp across their laps. Some families had buried 2 or 3 within days. The small graveyard by the Irako tree was filling fast. The entire village was under siege, but no one could see the enemy. The elders met beneath the great tree in the center of Amuaka. Their wrinkled faces were carved with worry. The village head, a man named Wokieka, pounded his staff against the ground. "Our children are dying," he said. "Our wives are weak. Our farms are empty. If this continues, our village will be no more." The people murmured, their voices low with fear. Some blamed witches. Others blamed angry gods. A few said it was the curse of the river which had overflowed its banks. But Janet sat quietly at the edge of the gathering, her heart burning with anger. She knew in her spirit that charms and sacrifices would not save them. She had lost Ngozi to the sickness. She would not lose Amara. And yet, she had no answers. She only had her grief, her fear, and the sound of mosquitoes that filled the night like an army. And so, the people of Amuaka suffered. Their ignorance chained them. Their traditions blinded them. They fought spirits, while the true enemy, the mosquito, feasted freely on their blood. It was a war they could not win until knowledge came from beyond their village. The rains had not ended, but something else entered Amuaka, something invisible, yet brighter than the sun itself. It came not in the voice of the dibia, nor in the chants of the women who prayed at the shrine. It came in the rumble of an engine, a strange, coughing sound that echoed across the hills. The people rushed out of their huts, shading their eyes against the morning light. Down the red earth road came a truck, its sides painted with bold words in English and Igbo. "Health is wealth. Malaria can be prevented." On the truck sat young men and women dressed in white coats, their stethoscopes glinting in the sun. Behind them were boxes, bags, and folded nets. They were doctors and nurses from the city, sent by the government and a foreign agency to bring health to forgotten villages. The people of Amuaka watched in silence, their hearts caught between awe and suspicion. The elders frowned, their staffs tapping nervously on the ground. Who were these strangers? What medicine did they bring? But Janet felt her spirit stir. For the first time in many moons, she felt something like hope. The truck stopped in the village square. Loudspeakers were set up. The white coats greeted the people in Igbo and Yoruba, their voices kind, their smiles calm. They spoke not of witches or curses, but of mosquitoes. The crowd gasped. The word was familiar, mosquito, but no one had ever believed such a small insect could bring such great suffering. The lead doctor, a tall woman with braided hair tucked neatly under her cap, raised her hand. "Malaria is not a curse," she said firmly. "It is not the anger of your ancestors. It is caused by a parasite carried by mosquitoes, and mosquitoes breed in stagnant water in dirty surroundings. To fight malaria, we must fight the mosquito." Her words struck like thunder. The people shifted uncomfortably. Could this be true? Could it be that all their sacrifices had been in vain? Then the boxes were opened. Out came mosquito nets, long and white, soft as clouds. The children squealed as they touched them. The women whispered in amazement. "These nets," the doctor explained, "are not ordinary cloth. They are treated with medicine that kills mosquitoes. Sleep inside them, and you will be safe." She lifted one high above her head, letting it flutter in the breeze. For the first time, the people saw a shield that could protect them. Not charms, not amulets, but science woven into fabric. The nurses then began to speak of treatment. They opened small bottles, showed white tablets, and explained how the medicine fought the parasite inside the blood. And then, something even greater. They spoke of prevention, clearing bushes around the homes, covering water pots, pouring out stagnant water where mosquitoes breed, visiting health centers early when fever begins. The villagers sat in stunned silence. They were hearing, perhaps for the first time, the truth about the sickness that had tormented them for generations. Janet's heart pounded as she listened. She thought of Ngozi, gone too soon. She thought of Amara, sweating on her mat. If she had known this earlier, could she have saved one daughter? Could she still save the other? Tears filled her eyes, but this time, they were not only tears of sorrow, they were tears of awakening. As the sun dipped lower, the white coats began to move from hut to hut. They hung nets, they gave medicine, they spoke gently to the mothers. The villagers followed, watching, learning, believing little by little. That night, for the first time, many families in Amuaka slept inside mosquito nets. The children lay curled in safety, their faces peaceful. The mosquitoes buzzed outside, angry but powerless. And as Janet sat by Amara's side, watching her daughter breathe calmly under the net, she whispered into the night, "At last, the light has come." This was the turning point. From ignorance to knowledge, from charms to science, from endless funerals to the hope of survival. But knowledge, like seed, must be watered. And in Amuaka, not everyone was ready to believe. Not all hearts in Amuaka welcomed the new knowledge. For every mother who marveled at the soft white nets, there was a father who folded his arms, his face dark with doubt. For every child who giggled beneath the protection of the fabric, there was an elder who spat on the ground, muttering that the ancestors were being mocked. The village square, once filled with whispers of fear, now echoed with arguments. Chief Okari, the oldest man in Amuaka, leaned heavily on his staff and raised his cracked voice. "Do not be deceived. Malaria is not from insects. It is the hand of our ancestors. When we break the laws of the land, fever is sent as punishment. If we begin to sleep inside these foreign nets, if we drink these tablets, we will only anger the spirits further." The crowd murmured in unease. Some nodded in agreement. Others frowned, torn between tradition and this new teaching. The white coats tried to explain again, their diagrams spread wide, showing the tiny mosquito, the parasite, the blood cells. But Chief Okari slammed his staff against the ground. "Can your papers explain why my father died after refusing a sacrifice? Can your drawings explain why fever comes after an abomination is committed?" The people gasped. His words carried weight, for the chief was custodian of their traditions. And so, a line was drawn in the dust. On one side were the believers of science. On the other, the guardians of tradition. The mothers were caught in the middle, Janet among them. Her heart pulled in two directions. She had lost Ngozi. She could not risk losing Amara, but she feared the wrath of her people, the ridicule of the elders. That night, when the moon was full and the air was heavy with the hum of insects, the division became sharper. Some families slept peacefully inside their nets, the mosquitoes dying silently on the mesh. But others, out of fear, pride, or stubborn faith, tore their nets apart and cast them into the fire. And in the darkness of Amuaka, two realities unfolded. In one hut, a child slept soundly, her brow cool, her breathing steady. In another, a boy shivered with fever, his skin burning, his mother wailing helplessly. The white coats grew weary, but they did not leave. They knew change was never born in a day. By the third week, rumors spread like wild harmattan fire. Some said the nets carried poison. Others whispered that the tablets were meant to make the people barren. And some claimed the strange doctors were harvesting souls for the city. Fear battled with knowledge. Ignorance fought with truth. Janet sat many nights in silence, her eyes fixed on Amara. Each cough from the girl pierced her soul like a spear. She had a choice to make. Would she cling to the comfort of tradition, or would she step into the uncertain light of knowledge? And in that tension, the whole of Amuaka held its breath. Every great change in history meets resistance. For malaria was not only a sickness of the body, it was a sickness of belief. And unless the mind was healed, the body would never be free. The air was thick that evening, swollen with heat and the restless buzz of mosquitoes. The moon rose pale, veiled by clouds, as if even the heavens feared to witness what was about to unfold. In the hut of Chief Okari, the fire crackled faintly. The old man, who had stood so firmly against the foreign wisdom, coughed weakly on his mat. His skin gleamed with sweat, his breath shallow and strained. Around him, his wives wailed softly, fanning him with palm leaves, placing bitter herbs on his tongue, whispering incantations into the smoky air. But the fever raged on, unbending, uncaring for chants or charms. By midnight, the whispers turned to cries. By dawn, the staff of Chief Okari lay abandoned in the dust, and the people of Amuaka poured into the square, mourning their leader. The irony cut deep. The loudest voice against the nets, the fiercest defender of tradition, had been taken by the very sickness he denied. The village wept, but within the morning, a hush fell. for many could not ignore the cruel twist of fate. The chief was strong. If herbs could save anyone, it would have been him, one elder muttered. Maybe the white coats are not wrong after all, a woman whispered, clutching her child closer. In Janet's hut, the tragedy struck harder. That same night, Amara's fever returned. Her small body trembled, her eyes rolled back. Janet screamed into the night, begging the spirits, begging the ancestors, begging anyone who would hear. But this time, something broke inside her. She did not run to the shrine. She did not call for the herbalist. She grabbed Amara in her arms and ran barefoot through the dusty paths until she reached the small clinic where the doctors had stayed. They worked quickly, the nurse pressing a cool cloth to Amara's head, the doctor injecting life-saving medicine into her frail body. 4 hours. Janet sat outside, her face wet with tears, rocking back and forth like a woman caught between worlds. Then, as dawn broke, the nurse stepped out. Her tired face softened into a smile. She will live. Janet collapsed to the ground, her cries echoing through the village like thunder, cries of grief for Ngozi, cries of relief for Amara, cries of anger at the blindness that had cost so many lives. That morning, the people gathered once more beneath the great tree. The body of Chief Okari lay in state, but the whispers around him were no longer about rituals. They were about medicine, about nets, about survival. The white coats did not gloat. They did not boast. They only spoke again, their voices steady and calm, repeating the truth with patience. Malaria is not the curse of ancestors. It is the bite of the mosquito. Protect yourselves, protect your children. The future of Amuaka depends on it. This time, the crowd did not resist. This time, eyes once clouded with doubt glimmered with painful clarity. And in the midst of them all, Janet stood with Amara at her side, living proof that science and tradition did not need to war. But only one had the power to save. Tragedy, cruel as it is, often becomes a teacher that words cannot be. Amuaka had lost much, but in their loss, they gained sight. And in sight, there was hope. The days after Chief Okari's death were heavy in Amuaka. His compound, once full of laughter and authority, became silent. Yet in that silence, a seed of change began to grow. The women gathered first, whispering among themselves at the streams, in the kitchens, at the market stalls. They remember their children's fevers, the graves of infants too young to walk, the nights of helpless wailing. They remembered Ngozi, whose laughter still echoed in Janet's hut. Then the men, still proud but shaken, sat beneath the great tree and spoke softly of what had happened. None dared admit it aloud, but each knew, if the chief could fall to malaria, no man was untouchable. One morning, the elders sent word to the clinic. The strangers in white coats were invited into the heart of the village, not as intruders, but as guests. They came with boxes of mosquito nets, sachets of medicine, and posters with drawings that show the mosquito cycle. They spoke in Igbo, in Yoruba, in Hausa, tongues that carried truth directly into the hearts of the people. Janet sat in the front row, Amara clinging to her hand. Her eyes, once dimmed by grief, now burned with fierce determination. She asked questions, she listened, and she vowed that her daughter's survival would not be in vain. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, Amuaka began to change. Nets stretched above sleeping mats like protective veils. Stagnant pools were drained, and villagers worked together to clear breeding grounds. Mothers carried their children to the clinic at the first sign of fever, instead of waiting for the herbalist. And at the center of this transformation was Janet. Her voice became the bridge between tradition and science. She told her story in the market square, in church gatherings, even at burials. She spoke of Ngozi, her child whose small grave was a permanent reminder of delay. She spoke of Amara, the child who lived because of timely medicine. Her words carried weight, for they were not from books or lectures. They were from the scars of lived experience. News of Amuaka's change spread to neighboring villages. Curious elders sent for Janet, asking her to come and tell her story. She traveled with health workers, sometimes walking miles, sometimes riding on motorbikes, always carrying her grief as a torch that lit the path for others. The story of one woman, once mocked and ignored, became a movement that taught villages that malaria was not a curse from ancestors, but an enemy that could be fought with knowledge, prevention, and medicine. Years passed. Amara grew strong, her body no longer frail but filled with the laughter of youth. Janet, though aged by sorrow, stood taller than ever before. She had lost much, but she had also saved many. Malaria is not just a sickness of the blood. It is a sickness of silence, of delay, of ignorance. But knowledge is light, and light scatters darkness. Let the story of Janet, of Ngozi, of Amara, of Amoaka be the story that saves another village, another family, another child. For every life lost to malaria is one too many, and every life saved is a victory for us all.